Welcome to this episode of the Sangamon County Circuit Clerk Presents. I'm Betsy Moore. The following program is one in a series of programs on various topics of public interest that concerns the Circuit Clerk's office, their various departments, and the issues they deal with. These programs are produced by the Office of Sangamon County Circuit Clerk Tony Libri in the hope that the information contained in them will help you better understand the role and the scope of the Sangamon County Circuit Clerk's office.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Circuit Clerk Presents. We try to find topics that are of interest to our viewing audience that actually helps them navigate their way through the court systems here in the 7th Judicial Circuit or here in Sangamon County. We get topics from readers and from employees, and in fact we also use these programs as training tapes in some instances, and today is no difference because we've got a special topic today that is really in the news just about every day here around Central Illinois. We are here with a special guest, Don Craven, who is a specialist. I can't say specialist as an attorney.
You can.
I can, but you can. All right. I am here with Don Craven, who is an attorney who seems to be doing a lot of FOIA work. Is that a proper way of saying it?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome, my friend. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
What a topic. FOIA stands for Freedom of Information Act, which was enacted originally in the 1970s.
The act took effect in 1974. It was the work of a committee of journalists, legislators, obviously some members from local governments. But the act took place in 74. Has been amended from time to time, and the last big rewrite was in 2010.
Okay, so just recently, and that was something spearheaded by the Attorney General of Illinois, I think.
Yes.
Supposedly to give it more teeth. Is that the?
Well, a tooth or two is better than no teeth at all.
Well, and we'll get into the practicality of this law, and I think we all agree that it's the idea is there. It's the right thing to do. That government should be open and have access to and transparent for the people.
Yeah, and that's one of the ideas underlying the law. You can look at it from either a micro perspective or a macro perspective.
Right.
I mean, you want to know. You may have a particular issue about, the real estate tax assessment for your house or some other particular record that you want or some issue that you're interested in, and that's sort of on the individual level. On the overall level, on the media, perhaps on the media level that I operate on most of the time, it's really about and I don't want to get all Jeffersonian on you, but a democratic republic demands an educated electorate.
Amen.
And without an educated electorate, you got sheep.
And this is a way of heading towards that goal, trying to achieve that goal. Because some would argue we don't have an educated electorate.
One of the purposes of the act is to force public records and information about the operation of government into the public. You can push it out there. You can't make them read it, but you can push it out there and you can make it available.
Well, let's take a couple steps back. Again, we said it was initiated in the 70s, been updated as recently as 2010. What is the Freedom of Information Act? What is it in a nutshell?
It is simply a mechanism by which a citizen, or including a reporter, but a lot of citizens use the act. It is simply a mechanism for a citizen to request a record or a set of records from a public body, from the state down to the Kern-Gardner Water District.
Okay, so you say, that was my next question. This is any governmental entity, in essence, has to follow this rule.
Yes.
And I mean, like you say, it's the water district, it's the park districts, it's the cities, it's the counties, it's the townships, everybody.
Everybody.
And boards and commissions and things like that.
Yes.
If you were on the sanitary
district. Any entity, any public body created by state law is subject to the Freedom of Information Act.
Okay, and what does the FOIA, that's the terminology we all use, what does the FOIA law say these bodies must do?
They must respond to and produce records requested by citizens. If I send a Freedom of Information Act request to the city of Springfield asking for a set of public records. They either have to tell me why those records are exempt from disclosure, and there are privacy exemptions and law enforcement exemptions. They either have to give
And
me
I would
those
assume
records.
you, as an attorney, you would think that was a reasonable, if
Right.
they're legitimate, that's a reasonable
They're-
denial. Right.
And that's a legislative judgment.
Right.
But
Okay.
there are, so they have 5 days, 5 working days to produce those records to me or tell me why I can't have them. And it's really that simple. I mean, the cookbook is, I file a request, they have 5 days to respond. If it's a big request, they can take another 5 days. They then have to tell me in writing why they're not giving them to me, why they're exempt, give me a factual and a legal basis for that conclusion.
And that buys them more time, but it doesn't negate the fact they still got to get it to you.
Right.
Okay.
And then if I disagree with that conclusion under the act as it is now, I can either go to court, or in the 2010 rewrite, the Attorney General created an office within her office. It's called the Public Access Counselor's Office, and it's designed to allow citizens or public officials in a dispute about public records to go to that office and say, here's what we got, help us.
Right. So the Open Meetings Act is kind of a sister law to this. Is that
Yes.
accurate?
Yes, it governs, again, all public bodies,
Right.
anybody created by the legislature, and those public bodies have to go, all meetings of those public bodies have to be in open. And again, there are some reasons to go into closed session.
Sure. Personnel matters.
Personnel
whatever.
matters, litigation, whatever.
Well, the reason I asked that is that what is it? Let's say you and I and 2 other people are on the water board or whatever, and we have a meeting. The FOIA laws say what? That if we're going to have an official meeting, we have to post that? Is that? And I realize that's under the Open Meetings
Under the
Act.
Open Meetings Act, you have to give 48 hours notice.
Okay.
You have to post a notice you're going to have a meeting. You have to post an agenda, and you're limited. And when you meet, you're limited to what's on that agenda.
Okay, but let's say we have this meeting, and we don't produce any written documentation of that meeting. What is there to FOIA? If somebody says, I want to know what you talked about in that meeting.
Someone who's smarter than you and I put a requirement.
Which really is a lot.
Put a requirement in the Open Meetings Act that every time that a public body has a meeting, there have to be minutes.
And that's why I brought up the Open Meetings Act, because I thought there was something like that. So if you're having meetings, and you haven't published the fact that you're having meetings in that acceptable time frame, and you haven't kept records, you're in violation in that respect too.
Yes.
So is it getting tougher and tougher to be an elected or a member of an elected body? I mean, are these rules too confining?
No. How can it be too confining?
Well, it must be, because you've got a pretty good
still
law
making a
practice
living.
right here that's doing pretty good with this topic.
There are
So that shows you somebody just ain't getting it.
and they're not getting it.
Right, okay.
And I have made the joke a couple of times that every time I think I've got everybody trained, we have one of those elections.
Okay.
And we
it
make
happens
new
again.
ones.
So all right, it's no secret that some of the local governments, and there's several entities, I might add, that are having some problems struggling with this. I am the circuit clerk, and since I am a member of the judiciary, if you will, we fall under a separate set of guidelines.
Yes.
As an example, we don't theoretically fall under the FOIA Act because you can have access to any record we have at any time we're open. So that's why it really doesn't concern my office that much, because if you want to see Joe Blow's record, you just come in and see it.
Right. And then
Go ahead.
the statute that governs your office says all records will be open.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, that language is mimicked in the Constitution, that the records of the courts shall be open.
Why do so many elected officials or appointed officials, I don't mean to narrow it down to just elected officials, why do they have such a tough time with this? This is not, I'm like you, I don't think this is a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal if you don't do it, but I don't understand why it's so cumbersome for them.
There are 2 big reasons that I find that underlay not turning over public records. One, the decision maker, the public body, the superintendent of schools, whoever it might be, thinks that they're going to either embarrass or hurt someone by turning over those records, and they really don't want to do that. And that's, perhaps a legitimate.
There might be some merit to that.
Legitimate thought, but that's not what the law says.
Right.
The other problem that I run into, frankly, all over the state, is this mindset that I'm not a public body. I'm Kmart. I'm Walmart. I'm a private entity, and these are my records. And the law and the philosophy underlying the law is really very simple. These are public records, and they are open, except for those few exceptions when they can be closed. And some people, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for bad, reverse that presumption, and you got to convince me why I should give you the records, and that's not the law. It doesn't matter why I want the records. It doesn't matter what I'm going to do with the records.
Right.
They're public records, and we're entitled to see them.
Well, I must tell you, working for county government, and as a former member of statewide government, I've seen this. I see these requests on a daily basis. As an example, we get a lot of mail from the prisoners who are in our facility or in the statewide facilities or Fed facilities, but it's like they have nothing to do sometimes, and they'll say, I want a list of everybody that you've ever talked to since 1979, and that's what gets the elected officials or people in those who are responsible for responding going, my goodness, this should be a cautionary tale, this FOIA business. So at what point is the government going to say, this is just a tremendous waste of time, or do we ever get to that point? Or this is what should be legal and this is what should not, this is what should be considered as frivolous?
I think
is that day ever going to come?
No,
no. Okay,
and there's I think a very good reason for that, because the underlying philosophy that these are our records and these are public records has to be overwhelming in a democratic, small d,
I picked up on
democratic form of government. Because without that information and without that ability to both understand what's going on and the ability, going back to your open meetings analogy, to watch the decision-making process, how are we ever to judge the behavior and the conduct and the decision-making prowess of either elected or appointed officials? We can't. So it's fundamental to the form.
If we're
going
to err, we're going to err to the side of the public.
Right.
And I understand that and agree with that. But I must tell you, here in Sangamon County, we have had to put on an attorney full-time to do nothing but respond to just FOIA requests for our jail.
Right.
A full-time attorney just for that.
And that has happened in a couple of other counties, and I know that the Illinois Department of Corrections has the same problem.
Similar deal. Yeah.
And there may be a way to there may be ways to structure a solution to that, but within the overall philosophy that even if you're incarcerated, you're still entitled to public records.
And that's true. All right, we're gonna continue this topic. You've been wonderful and full of information, so you've been a great guest. I appreciate you coming on. But we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back and talk more about the FOIA request, what happens if you don't comply with the law, and what's all this buzz going on with our local agencies around here who are having trouble with the FOIA request. So don't go away. We'll be right back. And we're back to Circuit Clerk Presents. We're talking about our topic today of the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, and we're pleased to have someone who is very well known as an attorney, but also as somebody who does a lot of these kind of cases, and a real expert here, Mr. Don Craven. Sir, once again, a pleasure to have you here. Let's talk more about FOIA. We've talked about where it came from, why it popped up on the legal scene, what good it does. But let's talk about some other things. In your practice, you've had some clients, without mentioning names. Have you been on both sides of this issue? I know you represent like the newspaper as an example on some issues.
I represent the newspaper association, the the broadcasters and news broadcasters. But as a matter of fact, I just finished my tenure on the Kern Gardner Water Board.
Yeah, okay.
And each public body under the Act now has to have one person responsible for responding to
It's
FOIA
gotten
requests.
that big. Okay.
And guess who that was for the Kern Gardner Water Board?
Was it you? No doubt.
You betcha.
So, well, and they had the right guy for the job. But is there, again, I had used the phrase cautionary tale. I had a family member get involved in an auto accident a couple of months ago. It wasn't her fault. But there were some injuries, and I'll be darned if somehow that information didn't get out and we just got all kinds of information from attorneys wanting to pick up the case and everything. So how would they find out about that?
Trust it's very simple. The plaintiff's personal injury lawyers have investigators who travel the interstates, stopping at the county sheriff's offices and the large, like the Springfield Police Department,
Right.
and they pick up the copies of all the accident reports.
And that's all
public record.
FOIable, what we call FOIable, okay.
And from that they get or sometimes they come to your office
Right.
and get the tickets that have been issued for failure to reduce speed to avoid an accident. That gives them names and addresses, and out go the glossy little packages.
There are people there's cottage industries that have cropped up, if you will, because of this Freedom of Information Act. Every time there's seminars at the hotel down the street, we get people coming in afterwards saying, "Hey, the seminar instructor just said we can get all of these foreclosure records here. We can get all."
I break it down more than that. I just say, go see Tony.
Well, we get a lot. Now, I will tell you that, again, I can see both sides of this. I am all for transparency. I am all for the public getting the information that they should have. It's just that I see the flip side of that, and I can understand why some people get somewhat aggravated with the system, because it doesn't, it takes us more time to gather some of this information than what it could possibly be worth to the recipient.
Yeah, the police chiefs, because in my capacity, I also see the legislative side of these battles, and the police chiefs are always complaining, and the sheriffs are always complaining about the personal injury lawyers. Somebody else is complaining about the insurance companies who come around looking for database information. Somebody else is complaining about prisoners. And can this act be abused? I mean, another point that we've talked about before is the use of a FOIA request or requests in political campaigns. Somebody trying to figure out all the bad things they can about you or any other candidate. So sure, can it be used in a way that we don't really intend it to be? Sure. Is that a reason to scrap the whole thing? Absolutely not.
No. Okay. Well, let's say you wanted to file a FOIA request. What is there a procedure that you follow? Is it similar for every elected official or every body?
We have tried to make it as cookbookish as we can.
Okay.
Every public body has to have, school district on up, the water district has to have one designated person as a FOIA officer. All you have to do...
That just shows you how this has grown.
All you have to do is write a letter. Dear FOIA officer, Kern Gardner Water District, I'm looking for X record. Now the act doesn't allow, it's not a question and answer period.
Right.
You're not asking for information, you're asking for records. You're asking for pieces of paper or electronic records. And it's that simple.
I want a copy of every rate increase you've had since 1982 or something like that. Okay.
Right.
It's not, why did you do this?
Right.
Okay. And so you don't need a particular form.
You don't need a form. You don't need and if the public body wants, all you have to do is make a phone call and say, this is what I want. And if they're willing to do it that way, a lot of public bodies want the paper trail, so there is a problem. But it can be as simple as a phone call.
Is there a way to structure your request that helps you get more of the information you want? Because if you write such a broad statement, it's easier to get by with not responding to that, is it not?
Right.
Should you, if You had mentioned earlier, when I ran for political office one time, we had an individual, 5 FOIAs a day for about 2 weeks, and each one of them wanted something separate, and we had no problem providing the information, other than it took just hours and hours to research it. But they would want information that was back before we were computerized, and we would have to go and physically look through every record, and we knew we probably didn't have what they wanted because it just never happened, but we would have to physically go back and look at the records to ensure that whatever it was that they wanted didn't happen. So it took time.
It can take a lot of time.
Yeah, and
now, as most public bodies become more and more technologically sophisticated,
right?
Try saying that fast.
Sure.
And records retention systems are being designed
right
to allow public bodies to respond to these requests
and
more simply.
Right. So, and as you say now, if they want a record, we just punch a button and it'll print it out.
Right.
So that brings me to my next question. You have requested a Freedom of Information Act request for my office, and you want pages and pages of information, which we will gladly assemble for you. What is the charge for something like that?
The General Assembly in 2010 set up a dual system. For paper records, the first 50 pages of records are provided free.
All right, so my 50-page response is free.
Right.
The first 50, all right.
After that, the public body can charge up to 15 cents a page. The statute says up to, it's usually 15 cents a page.
Okay.
For copies after that. Electronic records, if they can be provided in an electronic format, which is easier for you and,
right.
and easier for me.
Like a CD,
like
as
a CD
example.
or
okay.
an email.
Or an email, okay. Right.
If it's a CD, it's the cost of the CD. If it's an email, there's no cost.
Right. So it's again, it's not an expensive proposition for the person filing it.
No.
Is there a place to go? Is there a website that you're aware of? Someone from the audience shouted out an address earlier from the Paul Simon Institute that they can go, and there's maybe some guidelines that can tell them.
There are a couple of places. The I think it's the Paul Simon Institute of Public Policy down at SIU has a website, sort of a how-to website. The Attorney General has a guide on her website about how to use the Freedom of Information Act. And again, those are designed to be citizen user friendly.
Right.
There's a group called the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press that's housed in D.C.
And as you say,
that's a more sophisticated analysis of
much of
case
this
law. Freedom
of Information Act was initiated by reporters who had a legitimate need to know.
Right. There was sort of a dichotomy. The old guys said, I'm not having any trouble doing what it is I do.
Well, yeah, they know how to dig. That's right.
Back when reporters were reporters.
Right.
But there were reporters who were having some difficulty getting records, and frankly, there were a ton of citizens who were just not able to do what reporters do. So it is also intended to be a very citizen-friendly statute.
And overall, like I say, we're both in agreement that it's the right thing to do. Now, you're an attorney who deals with this a lot, and I've seen your name in the news and heard you on the radio and that type of thing.
I've paid some filing fees in your office.
Yes, you have. But as an attorney, there are some penalties for not complying with this law.
Yes.
But they don't seem to be very severe. So, I mean, this is a big thing. If we're going through all of these motions and gyrations to make sure that every elected body or governing body has a FOIA officer, if we have to have people full-time now doing these things, what are the penalties and why aren't they stronger than what they are?
Well, let's question one and question two. The penalties are this. If you don't comply with FOIA and I have to sue you in order to get the documents that I want, and I win, if I prevail or substantially get most of the documents that I want, you're going to end up paying my attorney's fees. Okay. Now, that may not seem like much of a penalty.
But I've seen your fees.
And it's certainly more of a penalty to the taxpayers than it is to you.
Of course it is.
And but that's penalty number one. Penalty number two in the 2010 Act, if it's a willful violation, if it's an intentional violation, the court can also award a $5,000 civil penalty for violating the act. And as a matter of fact, that has happened. I'm aware of 3 instances across the state where that's happened just since the 2010 rewrite. But it's monetary penalties to the public body, not to the individual elected official, not to, in your case, it's not out of your pocket,
Right.
It's out of your budget,
Right.
But it's out of the taxpayer's pocket.
So there are some penalties, just like there would be penalties for the Open Meetings Act. Again, it's kind of a sister rule there. But the Open Meetings Act is an example I read recently where if you haven't been challenged on that for 30 days, then there's no penalty.
A violation of the Open Meetings Act, and that's been changed. It's up to, we have a 60-day window to
It's 60 days now, okay.
to bring a claim of a violation of the Open Meetings Act. And there's a reason for that. After, let's assume that you approve a bond, if a public body approves a bond issue.
Sure.
And how long do you want to let that clock run before that's final?
Understand. But usually when you're doing things like that, I would assume they're being done in the open anyway. It's those things where they don't want you to know they're meeting that.
You would hope.
You would hope, yes. Well, we've talked about the penalties and things like that. What are give me some examples of Freedom of Information Act where you got the case and you went, oh my goodness, I just don't believe this, without mentioning names.
Well, for instance, I have a client, the example I gave you without mentioning names, goes around for the title companies and collects real estate tax assessment data. Some assessors just don't want to give that up. That's my data. That's not your data. I don't know what you're going to do with it. You're going to start calling the homeowners and bugging them about their assessments. No, we're not. It doesn't matter, but no, we're not. But, my goodness, it's data that's collected for
they're data mining, sure.
And it's collected by the government for governmental purpose. That's the epitome of a public record, but that's when it falls into the oh my goodness, we don't want to give that up. Another example where public officials, I mentioned embarrassing or hurtful. We've been involved in several cases lately involving access to internal affairs reports for police departments.
That's probably where it gets a little touchy.
And that's where it gets a little touchy, both for the police officer and for any witnesses, victims, other people involved in those reports.
Well, we're running out of time. This has been an interesting half hour. People can contact you at your law firm. I'm not afraid to say what's your address and a good place for them to contact you if they have a FOIA question.
Well, someone mentioned earlier websites. Go to cravenlawoffice.com and hit talk to Don and send me your question.
Well, and I would imagine that you're the go-to guy because that's why we had you here. And sir, we are tickled to death that you came and you answered our questions, and I hope we answered a lot of the questions that you might have had on your mind. So again, thank you for coming. We'll have you back.
My pleasure.
It's been a joy. Once again, thank you for watching Circuit Clerk Presents, and we hopefully will have a topic the next time that will interest you as much as this one has. Thank you once again to our guest, Don Craven. I'm Tony Libri. We'll see you next time.